Racist cop arrests black woman at the airport, dragging her from the security line for a so-called random search. The bustling terminal grew quieter as travelers glanced toward the scene, sensing the tension brewing. The woman, dressed sharply in professional attire, carried herself with calm dignity despite the escalating hostility. "Step aside, ma'am," the officer barked, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. She turned to face him, her gaze steady. "Is there a reason you've chosen me?" she asked, her voice clear but measured. "Your behavior seems suspicious," he replied, crossing his arms. His smirk widened as he added, "You look like someone who might be hiding something." Nearby passengers exchanged uneasy glances. The woman, unshaken, handed over her ID and spoke evenly. "There's nothing suspicious about me. I suggest you run my information." The officer barely glanced at the ID before handing it back. "This looks a little too perfect," he muttered loudly, making sure those around could hear. "What's in the bag? Contraband? Stolen goods? Let's find out." "I have nothing to hide, but I also know my rights," she said firmly, keeping her composure. "You don't have probable cause to search me." The officer's smug expression darkened. "Probable cause? We'll see about that." With a quick motion, he grabbed her arm. "You're coming with us," he said, ignoring her protests. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the woman maintained her composure. "You're making a mistake," she warned calmly. "I suggest you stop before this gets out of hand." The officer scoffed, motioning to another officer for backup. "Big talk for someone under arrest," he said, tightening his grip. As they began escorting her away, the woman reached into her bag with measured movements. "Before you go any further," she said, handing him a card, "I recommend you check this clearance code." The officer, still full of bravado, glanced at the card dismissively. "Clearance code? What's this supposed to prove?" he asked, rolling his eyes. "Call it in," she replied firmly. "You'll want to confirm it." The officer, skeptical but curious, radioed the information. Moments later, his device crackled to life. The response was immediate and panicked. "Release her immediately," came the urgent voice from the other end. "She has top-level government clearance. Do not detain her under any circumstances." The officer froze, his arrogance melting into shock. The whispers in the terminal grew louder as the woman stood, her calm gaze piercing. "I told you," she said softly. "You've made a mistake. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below." The officer stared at the woman, his grip slackening as the urgent voice on his radio repeated the order. "Release her immediately." Travelers paused mid-step, their curious glances turning into whispers of disbelief. The woman, who had remained calm throughout the humiliating ordeal, gently adjusted her bag and turned to meet his stunned gaze. Her composure was unbroken, but the weight of the situation was undeniable. The black woman at the center of the escalating scene was more than she appeared. Behind her unassuming demeanor was a highly accomplished government official, entrusted with matters of national importance. Her role often required anonymity and precision, and she had spent years perfecting the art of staying composed under pressure. Today, she was on her way to an urgent mission that demanded both her intellect and her resolve. Her path hadn't been easy. As a woman of color in a system riddled with prejudice, she had faced countless obstacles. But instead of letting them deter her, she'd used them to fuel her drive for excellence. Every step of her career had been earned through grit, intelligence, and an unwavering belief in justice. Her calm professionalism was not just a personality trait. It was a survival skill, honed by years of navigating situations like the one unfolding in the airport. The officer, however, saw none of that. His judgment had been swift and unthinking, rooted in bias rather than fact. To him, she wasn't a professional or a government official. She was a target. Tall and broad-shouldered, his presence was commanding, but it was his arrogance that filled the space around him. He prided himself on spotting trouble, and had decided, without evidence, that the woman standing before him fit the profile. His suspicion wasn't subtle. From the moment he approached her, his questions were laced with thinly veiled accusations. "What are you hiding?" he had asked, his tone more accusation than inquiry. His posture radiated authority, but his behavior spoke of entitlement and bias. It was clear that he wasn't interested in hearing her explanations. He was looking for a reason to act. The airport was alive with the sound of rolling suitcases, announcements echoing through the terminals, and the steady hum of conversations. Families shuffled through security checkpoints. Business travelers typed furiously on laptops, and solo adventurers checked their itineraries. Among them, the woman had blended seamlessly, her sharp business attire and efficient movements reflecting her focus and purpose. The contrast between her composed demeanor and the officer's aggressive behavior couldn't have been more stark. As he raised his voice, demanding answers to questions that had no basis, she maintained her calm. "I've done nothing wrong," she had said, her voice steady. "I'm happy to cooperate within reason, but I know my rights." The travelers around them began to notice. Some slowed their pace, their curiosity piqued, while others deliberately looked away, unwilling to get involved. A child tugged at their parent's sleeve, asking, "What's happening?" The parent whispered back, "Just keep walking." The officer's attitude only grew more confrontational, as the woman refused to be intimidated. "Let's see if you're still this confident once we search your bag," he had sneered, his tone dripping with condescension. She had calmly replied, "You have no cause to search me." His aggression, juxtaposed with her professionalism, painted a clear picture of the power dynamics at play. To him, her poise was a challenge to his authority, and he was determined to assert control. To her, his behavior was an all-too-familiar reminder of the systemic biases she had faced throughout her life. Now, standing in the wake of his radio call, the officer's arrogance had evaporated. The woman's clearance code had shifted the power dynamics in an instant. The bustling airport seemed to slow as those watching tried to process what had just happened. The woman remained composed, her voice calm but firm as she addressed him. "Perhaps next time," she said, her tone measured, "you'll think twice before making assumptions about someone based on how they look." The woman's composed response to the officer's panicked expression hung in the air like a challenge. Travelers nearby whispered among themselves, the earlier tension now shifting, as they sensed the power dynamic had changed. But just minutes earlier, the situation had been far different. The officer's demeanor had been confrontational from the start. "Where are you heading, ma'am?" he asked sharply, his eyes narrowing as if searching for a flaw in her response. "To Washington, D.C., she replied evenly. "Is there a problem?" "That depends," he retorted, folding his arms across his chest. "What's in the bag?" "Work documents and personal items," she said, her tone unwavering. "Work documents?" he repeated, his tone laced with suspicion. "Mind telling me what kind of work requires you to carry a case like that?" Her grip on the briefcase tightened slightly, but her expression remained neutral. "I'm a government official," she said. "My credentials are valid, and everything I'm carrying is legal." The officer scoffed, his smirk growing. "Government official? That's a new one. Let me guess. Diplomatic immunity next?" Nearby, passengers paused, their interest piqued. A few exchanged glances, silently questioning the officer's behavior, but no one stepped forward. The woman's calm refusal to escalate the situation only seemed to frustrate him further. "You're awfully composed for someone in this position," he said, leaning closer. "Makes me wonder what you're hiding." She met his gaze steadily. "I'm not hiding anything," she replied. "I'm simply refusing to be intimidated." His persistence brought back memories she had worked hard to push aside. She remembered being stopped during a routine traffic check, the officer questioning her extensively because he didn't think she owned a car like that. Another time, she had been trailed by store security for no reason other than the assumption that she might steal something. These experiences were painful but not unique, and they had shaped her ability to remain calm in the face of blatant prejudice. She had also developed a quiet resilience through the support of mentors and colleagues who had encouraged her to keep going, even when systemic barriers made progress difficult. Her husband's words echoed in her mind. "You've earned your place, no matter what anyone says. Don't let anyone take that from you." Those words fueled her now. The officer's attempts to provoke her wouldn't work. She stood her ground. The cop, sensing the crowd's growing attention, escalated further. "Let me make this simple," he said loudly, his voice carrying over the terminal's noise. "Either open the bag, or we'll open it for you. What's it going to be?" The woman folded her arms, her voice calm but firm. "Unless you have probable cause, you don't have the right to search me." His smirk vanished, replaced by an angry sneer. "Probable cause? How about resisting a lawful order? That's good enough for me." Gasps rippled through the crowd as he grabbed her arm roughly. "You're under arrest," he announced, his tone triumphant. The woman didn't resist, but maintained her composure, her voice steady as she said, "You're making a mistake." The crowd murmured in shock, their reactions a mix of discomfort and disbelief. One man whispered, "What's she even done?" While another added, "This doesn't feel right." Still, no one stepped in, the tension in the air thick and heavy. As the officer began leading her toward a side area, a child tugged at their parent's sleeve. "Mommy, why is that man being mean to her?" The parent hushed the child quickly, glancing around nervously. The officer seemed emboldened by the silence of the bystanders. "We'll sort this out at the station," he muttered. "And let's see if you're still so calm when we do." Despite his rough treatment, the woman kept her head high, refusing to show weakness. "Before you go any further," she said, her voice carrying above the murmurs, "you should check this." She reached into her bag, careful not to make any sudden movements, and handed him a sleek card. "That's my clearance code," she said. "I recommend you verify it." The officer stopped, his expression a mix of skepticism and annoyance. "What's this supposed to prove?" he sneered. "Call it in," she replied simply. "You'll find out." The crowd, now fully invested in the scene, watched as the officer hesitated before reluctantly pulling out his radio. He read the code aloud, his tone mocking. "Let's see what this little magic card does." Moments later, his radio crackled to life. The response was immediate and panicked. "Officer, release her immediately," the voice ordered. "She has top-level government clearance. Do not detain her under any circumstances." The officer froze, his expression shifting from smugness to visible shock. What do you mean?" he stammered. "You heard me," the voice snapped. "Let her go now." The crowd, sensing the shift, began murmuring again, their whispers now tinged with disbelief. The woman straightened her coat, her calm expression never faltering. "I told you," she said quietly. "You've made a mistake." The officer's radio buzzed with urgency, and the panicked voice on the other end repeated the order. "Release her immediately. She has top-level government clearance. Do not detain her under any circumstances." The smirk that had dominated the cop's face vanished in an instant, replaced by confusion and disbelief. He turned to the woman, his grip on her arm loosening as the gravity of the situation began to sink in. Just moments earlier, the cop had been fully in control, or so he thought. He had been smug, certain that his actions would go unquestioned. As the woman stood quietly, maintaining her composure, he looked at the clearance card in his hand with mounting unease. "This has to be a joke," he muttered under his breath. Then, louder, he added, "You think this little card gets you a free pass? We'll see about that." His mocking tone carried across the terminal, drawing more onlookers who now watched intently. The woman remained calm, her expression steady. "I've asked you to verify it," she said simply. "Go ahead." The officer, unwilling to show doubt, picked up his radio and read the clearance code aloud again. His tone was dripping with skepticism, but his demeanor began to shift as the silence on the other end stretched uncomfortably long. Finally, the response came, swift and urgent. "This is verified clearance," the voice snapped. "Repeat, verified top-level government clearance. Release her immediately." The crowd, previously hushed, began murmuring again, the dynamic shifting palpably as the officer's posture deflated. The woman adjusted her bag, watching his reaction with an air of quiet control. "You're joking," the cop stammered, his face growing pale. "She's—" "Yes," the voice on the radio barked. "And if you've detained her, you'd better prepare for consequences." The tension that had filled the terminal moments earlier now turned sharply against the officer. The onlookers who had stayed silent during the arrest now murmured louder, their expressions ranging from disbelief to guilt. One man whispered to his partner, "She told him, didn't she?" While another muttered, "This was completely unnecessary." The cop tried to recover his composure, clearing his throat and stepping back slightly. I didn't realize," he said awkwardly, his earlier arrogance gone. "There must have been a misunderstanding." The woman raised an eyebrow but said nothing, letting his discomfort hang in the air. It wasn't just his words that betrayed him, it was his entire demeanor. The certainty with which he had treated her earlier was now replaced with visible uncertainty and fear. "Misunderstanding," a voice from the crowd called out, "looked pretty intentional to me." The cop ignored the comment, fumbling with the radio as if looking for further instructions. "I think we can handle this now," he muttered, glancing at the other officers who had been watching from a distance. They, too, seemed unsure of what to do next. Within minutes, higher authorities arrived. Airport security supervisors accompanied by senior law enforcement officers. Their presence alone shifted the atmosphere further. The lead supervisor approached the woman with a mixture of professionalism and visible concern. "Ma'am," he began, his tone respectful, "I'd like to personally apologize for this incident." The officer who had detained her stood stiffly to the side, his expression a mixture of anger and humiliation, as the supervisor turned toward him. "You were out of line," the supervisor said sharply. "This isn't how we conduct ourselves, and it's certainly not how we treat someone of her clearance level, or anyone, for that matter." The crowd, now emboldened, began murmuring louder. "Good," someone said loudly. "Hold him accountable." A few people stepped closer, voicing their support for the woman. "I'm so sorry we didn't step in," a young woman said softly, her eyes filled with guilt. "You didn't deserve this." The woman turned to the young woman and nodded. "Thank you," she said simply. Her voice carried no anger, only calm resolve. The tables had turned entirely. The officer who had been so confident in his power now found himself under scrutiny. The senior officials took statements from witnesses, some of whom eagerly stepped forward to recount what they had seen. "I watched the whole thing," one man said angrily. She didn't do anything wrong. He just went after her. Another added, she kept her cool the whole time. It's him you need to investigate. The lead supervisor turned to the woman again. We'll ensure this is addressed, he said. Is there anything else we can do for you right now? She straightened her coat and met his gaze. Just make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else, she said firmly. That's all I ask. As the crowd began to disperse, the officer who had detained her stepped forward hesitantly, his earlier bravado gone. I didn't mean for it to go this far, he said weakly. I'm sorry if, the woman interrupted, her voice sharp but controlled. This wasn't an accident. You made assumptions about me from the moment you saw me, and you acted on them without cause. Apologies don't fix that. The officer looked away, unable to respond. The lead supervisor motioned for him to step back. We'll handle this from here, he said curtly. The woman nodded, her expression softening slightly. Good, she said. I hope you do. As she walked away, the murmurs of the crowd followed her. Some expressed admiration for her composure, while others voiced their shock at the cop's behavior. A few even clapped quietly as she disappeared into the terminal, her head held high. The incident had ended, but its impact lingered. The woman had stood her ground, refusing to let bias and aggression define her, and in doing so, she had shifted the power dynamic entirely. As the woman walked away from the confrontation, her poise intact, whispers followed her. The incident had drawn attention not just to the officer's behavior, but to her undeniable strength and composure. However, the clearance code she had provided was more than a badge of honor. It was a key to her critical role in national security. She wasn't just a traveler. She was on her way to an intelligence mission that required her utmost focus, a mission that could shape the future of her country. The clearance code revealed more than her high-ranking position. It confirmed her involvement in top-level intelligence work, a role she had fought tirelessly to earn. Flashbacks of her journey played in her mind as she strode through the airport, reflecting on the barriers she had overcome. As a young woman, she had often been the only person of color in rooms filled with decision-makers. In one memory, she was an eager intern presenting a well-researched proposal, only for her colleagues to question her qualifications before even hearing her speak. Her mentor, an older black woman who had faced similar challenges, had pulled her aside afterward. "You belong here," the mentor had said firmly. "Don't ever let anyone make you think otherwise." Those words had become a mantra as she rose through the ranks, taking on increasingly complex assignments. She had faced skepticism and outright bias, but she had always responded with resilience and brilliance, proving herself time and again. It wasn't just about breaking barriers for herself. It was about paving the way for others who would follow. Today's confrontation was just another example of the systemic challenges she had faced throughout her life. But instead of diminishing her resolve, it only strengthened her commitment to justice and accountability. When she reached the gate, a small group of passengers who had witnessed the incident approached her hesitantly. One of them, a middle-aged woman with a kind expression, spoke first. "I'm so sorry for what happened back there," she said, her voice filled with sincerity. "You handled that with such grace." Another man nodded. "It was wrong, plain and simple. And the way you stood your ground, I'll be thinking about that for a long time." The woman smiled faintly, her composure unwavering. "Thank you," she said. "But this isn't just about me. It's about the systems that allow these kinds of things to happen in the first place." She glanced at the growing crowd around her, sensing an opportunity to make a broader point. "What you saw today isn't unique," she began, her voice calm but firm. "People are profiled, dismissed, and mistreated every single day because of the way they look. That officer assumed I was guilty without evidence, and he acted on those assumptions. The crowd listened intently, their expressions a mix of guilt, admiration, and reflection. "What I want you to take from this," she continued, "is that silence allows these things to continue. If you see something wrong, speak up. If you're in a position to make changes, do it. Accountability starts with each of us." Her words hung in the air, resonating deeply with those around her. A young woman stepped forward, her eyes glistening with emotion. "Thank you for saying that," she said. "I've stayed quiet in situations like that before, and I regret it. I'll do better." The woman nodded. "That's all any of us can do. Try to be better, to create a world where these things don't happen anymore." As the crowd began to disperse, a senior airport official approached her, his expression one of genuine remorse. "Ma'am," he said, "on behalf of the airport, I want to personally apologize for what you experienced today. We'll be conducting a thorough review of our procedures, and I can assure you that action will be taken." She met his gaze, her expression firm. "Make sure it happens," she said. "Words aren't enough." As she boarded her flight, the events of the day lingered in her mind. The confrontation had been humiliating, yes, but it had also served as a reminder of her purpose. Her work wasn't just about intelligence. It was about justice, about creating a world where everyone was treated with dignity and respect. Sitting in her seat, she allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. The mission ahead was critical, but so was the fight for equality. Today had been one battle, but the war for justice was ongoing, and she was ready to face it head-on. Seated on the plane, the woman stared out the window, her reflection visible against the soft blue of the sky. The events at the airport replayed in her mind: the officer's hostility, the crowd's hesitation, and the shift when her clearance code changed everything. She closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself a moment to process it all. By the time the plane landed, news of the incident had begun to spread. Passengers who had witnessed it were already sharing their accounts online, and the story quickly gained traction. "Racial profiling at the airport," one post read, while another shared, "She stayed so calm, but that officer was out of line." The hashtags number airport bias and number justice for all began trending within hours, sparking a wider conversation about systemic prejudice in law enforcement. Back at the airport, the fallout had already begun. The officer who had detained her was placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. Airport authorities issued an official apology, acknowledging the incident and promising to review their procedures. "We take these matters seriously," the statement read, "and we are committed to ensuring that all travelers are treated with respect and fairness." The woman saw the statement on her phone as she waited for her connecting flight. She appreciated the gesture, but knew from experience that words alone wouldn't bring change. Real accountability required action, something she intended to ensure. The public reaction to her story was swift and polarizing. Some praised her for her composure and courage, while others questioned why her clearance code had been necessary to prove her innocence. "Why should someone need top-level clearance to avoid being harassed?" one commenter wrote. "This shouldn't happen to anyone, regardless of their status." The woman couldn't agree more. As she sat in the terminal, reflecting on the day's events, she thought about the countless others who faced similar treatment, but lacked the resources or platform to fight back. For them, there was no clearance code to halt the injustice, only silence and frustration. She thought of the strength it had taken to remain calm in the face of such blatant bias. It wasn't just her training or her position that had steadied her. It was a lifetime of navigating a world where she was often underestimated or judged unfairly. From her early days as a student to her rise as a government official, she had learned to pick her battles carefully, always holding her ground when it mattered most. Her phone buzzed with a call from a colleague. "I just heard what happened," they said, their tone filled with concern. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," she replied. "But this isn't just about me. It's about a system that allows this kind of behavior to happen in the first place." The colleague paused before responding. "You're right," they said, "and your story is already making waves. People are listening." "That's good," she said, "because this conversation needs to happen, not just here, but everywhere." In the days that followed, the incident continued to gain attention. News outlets covered the story, highlighting the issues of racial bias and profiling in airports. Civil rights organizations called for reforms, using her experience as a catalyst to push for systemic change. The woman, though reluctant to step into the spotlight, recognized the importance of her voice in the discussion. She agreed to an interview, where she spoke candidly about the incident and its broader implications. "This isn't just about one officer," she said during the interview. "It's about a culture that normalizes bias and discrimination. What happened to me could happen to anyone. And it does happen. To people without clearance codes or platforms to speak out." She paused, her gaze steady as she addressed the camera. "We have to do better. We have to hold people accountable, not just for individual actions, but for the systems that enable those actions. Change isn't easy, but it's necessary." As the interview aired, her words resonated with viewers around the world. Some shared their own stories of profiling and prejudice, while others called on leaders to implement reforms. The ripple effect of her experience was undeniable, sparking conversations about fairness, accountability, and the need for systemic change. For the woman, the incident was both a reminder of the work that still needed to be done and a testament to the power of resilience. She had faced prejudice head-on and emerged stronger, her composure and courage inspiring others to do the same. As she prepared for her next mission, she carried the weight of the experience with her, not as a burden, but as a reminder of her purpose. The fight for equality wasn't just her professional responsibility, it was a personal one, too. And she was ready to continue it, one step at a time. As she sat in front of the camera for a follow-up interview, the woman's expression was calm but resolute. The incident at the airport had been a stark reminder of the work still needed to dismantle systemic bias, and she was determined to use her platform to spark change. "This isn't just about one moment or one officer," she said, her voice measured yet powerful. "It's about a system that allows prejudice to persist, unchecked and unchallenged. What happened to me is part of a larger problem, one that affects countless people who don't have the privileges I do. The question isn't whether this happens, it's what we're going to do to stop it." She paused, her gaze steady as she addressed the audience. "We all have a role to play in creating a fairer, more just society. It starts with holding individuals accountable, but doesn't stop there. We need to demand systemic reforms that ensure everyone is treated with dignity and respect, no matter who they are or where they come from." Her words resonated deeply, the simplicity of her message cutting through the complexities of the issue. Speak out when you see injustice, support policies that promote equity, and above all, remember that silence only enables prejudice to grow. The interview concluded, and she stood, smoothing her coat as she prepared to board her flight. Walking toward her gate, she felt the weight of the day's events, but also a renewed sense of purpose. Each step she took was a testament to her resilience, and a reminder that the fight for justice wasn't over. It was just beginning.